You're listening to WSFM LP 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show can also be heard on KWTF in Bodega Bay, California, KOWA LP in Olympia, Washington, and WCRS LP in Columbus, Ohio. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. You can also note that we are now podcasting on iTunes. If you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show or any of the shows, you're free to do so. Just send us an email so we know that you're doing it. If you'd like to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville, specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.
Brandon Baxter, Connor Stephens, Doug Wright, and Joshua Skelly Stafford were arrested on April 30th of 2012 for attempting to blow up a bridge with provocation of an FBI informant named Shaquille Azier. More about the case can be found at cleveland4solidarity.org. Following this, we speak with volunteers from the nonprofit radical media outlet Unicorn Riot. Unicorn Riot has done an amazing job of featuring dazzling on-the-ground coverage of struggles such as those following the police murders of Jamar Clark and Philando Castille in the Minneapolis area, also around the violent removal of homeless settlements in Denver, and the ongoing struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline, or DAPL, in North Dakota. Their work can be found at unicornriot.ninja. Tomorrow, Monday, December 5th in Asheville, there's a prayer and vigil in solidarity with Standing Rock as regards the struggle to stop the expansion of DAPL that we'll be talking about later on in this episode briefly. Folks are meeting at Pack Square at 6 p.m. Bring an offering. Also, big ups to the folks who went out to face off with the KKK motorcade on Saturday the 3rd in Danville, Virginia, and Pelham, North Carolina. At least this time, the KKK got their own stabby. Here at the Final Straw Radio, our hearts go out to those suffering the devastating effects of the fire at the Ghost Ship warehouse on Friday, December 2nd, during the 100% Silk Party. According to the most recent KGO 7 news out of San Francisco at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday, December 4th, right now, 24 victims have been found inside the warehouse. A list of missing people has been compiled in an article at Heavy.com with the title, Oakland Warehouse Fire Victims Missing Photos. Not all of those pictured are known to be among the victims of Friday's fire. To donate relief funds, you can visit ucaring.com and search Fire Relief Fund for Victims of Ghost Ship Oakland Fire.
But before the interview, here are some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We'll call like a what?
Today is Fidel Castro's funeral. In the 1950s, Fulgencio Batista ruled Cuba as the dictator, occasionally allowing rigged elections. Batista and the ruling elite of Cuba thrived on American bribes, turning their island into a Caribbean Las Vegas. The population lived short, cruel lives with the highest infant mortality rate and the lowest literacy rate in the hemisphere. After one particularly obviously fixed election, a young upstart lawyer named Fidel Castro challenged the results. When that failed, Castro set his mind on orchestrating a revolution. He joined a group that laid siege to the Moncada barracks, hoping to gain access to the armory and to arm the Cuban people, toppling the Batista regime. Moncada failed, and Castro was sent to prison for life. At his sentencing, Castro issued a firebrand declaration that concluded with a prescient prediction that history would vindicate him. After years in prison, Castro was released when someone bribed Batista, and Castro was sent into exile in Mexico, where he met up with a revolutionary Cuban expatriate group and an Argentine named Che Guevara. Castro immediately set his mind again to toppling Batista. Castro's crew attempted to buy a PT boat so they could sail to Cuba and undertake guerrilla warfare, but the deal for the boat fell through. With no other options, the group purchased a yacht from a Cuban expat retired in Mexico. Castro and friends crammed more than 100 people onto that yacht with food and water for the journey. The plan was to rendezvous with a contingent in Cuba who would have weapons waiting on the beach. But nobody checked the weather first, so they sailed directly into a hurricane. Because the yacht was sailing so heavy with more than 100 people, it took on water. The salt water shorted out the electricity, killing all navigation and refrigeration. So they sailed blind, and all their food spoiled. In the days that Castro and his crew sailed in circles out in the ocean, patrols discovered the contingent on the Cuban beach and arrested them and confiscated all their guns. The Cuban military waited in ambush. When Castro's crew finally figured out where they were and sailed toward Cuba, they were starving and dehydrated and hurricane-weary. As they approached the island, planes flew over, dropping bombs. Soldiers fired. In response, the revolutionaries panicked and ran aground on a sandbar, stranded 100 yards from shore. So under fire and with bombs dropping from the sky, the 100-plus guerrillas dove into the ocean and swam for the beach. In the chaos that followed, most of the survivors ran up the beach and into the jungle and found their way back to their respective homes, resuming their non-revolutionary lives. But not all. A local farmer discovered a handful of cold and shivering, hungry people wandering in the jungle around his farm. Since it was raining season, the farmer brought those wandering guerrillas to his barn and gave them food and blankets. There were 12 of them. They had 4 operable firearms between them and very little ammunition. They were exhausted and cold and wet, and their leader, the brains of this operation, was a failed revolutionary who had already been sent to prison once and had sailed them into a hurricane and into a sandbar and into failure after failure. There, in that barn, the 12 of them had to decide what to do moving forward. They decided to load their 4 weapons and wage irregular warfare against a mechanized and technologically advanced military of 80,000 soldiers that had the full backing of the United States government. 18 months later, Fulgencio Batista fled Havana and went into exile with a suitcase full of cash. What began with 12 shivering, hapless dreamers in a barn ended with the toppling of a tyrant. The significance of the Cuban Revolution is that at no time did the guerrilla forces number more than 5,000. It occurred just miles off of the shore of Florida. And, as an example for us, the Cuban Revolution proved that we don't have to wait for conditions in order to instigate or provoke rebellion. That once an insurrection begins, it becomes contagious. What Castro and those revolutionaries accomplished in ousting a dictator can be duplicated by Zapatistas in Mexico, or Sandinistas in Nicaragua, or by you and me right here, right now. Political violence works. Want to change the world? You only need 12 guerrillas, 4 guns, and a yacht. Now, all that said, Castro was a hierarch. So after leading the rebellion that successfully ousted a dictator, Castro ceased being a guerrilla and assumed the swivel chair behind the former dictator's desk. As a head of state, Castro can be criticized for political repression and for not allowing elections, although much of that was influenced greatly by the constant threat of U.S. interference and sabotage. Had Castro permitted free elections, the CIA would have funded an electoral coup. But Castro, the head of state, is not the example that speaks to all of us. I think we can easily distinguish between Castro the guerrilla, who opposed the existing power through political violence, and the later disappointing Castro, who became the existing power. Castro the rebel stared down a ruthless terror state and declared that history would vindicate him. May history vindicate us as well. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from Warren Correctional Institution in Lebanon, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
I'm out for presidents to represent me. I'm out for presidents to represent me.
You can write to Sean Swain at Sean Swain 243-205 Warren CI P.O. Box 120 5787 State Route 63 Lebanon, Ohio 45036. For updates on his situation and more writings by Sean can be found at seanswain.org.
I'm speaking with Amanda Shemkes, a legal supporter for the Cleveland Four, and in particular for Brandon Baxter. Thanks a lot for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me.
So many people in the audience may not be familiar with the case of the Cleveland Four, despite it being such a recent one. Who are the Four, and can you tell folks a little bit about their stories?
Yeah, so the four are Brandon Baxter, Connor Stevens, Doug Wright, and Josh Stafford, who's also known as Skelly. And they were four Occupy Cleveland activists who were caught up in being entrapped by the FBI. The FBI had a paid informant who spent months manipulating them into a plot that he created, and that the government supplied fake explosives to blow up a bridge. And they then were prosecuted as terrorists for this, even though it's something that never would have happened if not for a government informant crafting the whole thing and pressuring them into it.
And so just to lay out a little more deeply, can you talk a little bit about, like, do you know the situations that they were in when they got involved with the confidential informant, the Shaquille Azir? Like, I had heard that they were all, like, basically like a small crew of anarchists that some of which were, like, influenced by Catholic worker and stuff, and they were doing food up bombs and mostly kind of living on the streets and off of food donations, and kind of got taken under Shaquille Azir's wing, right?
Yes, very much so. He started to really start talking to them at the end of Occupy, when things had started to fall apart, and we saw that happening nationally, where Occupy encampments, the government basically decided that it was time for them to end, and they effectively put an end to them. And so people, especially these four people, were lost at that point, trying to figure out what to do. They had been living at the encampment. They'd been doing, as you said, food not bombs work, trying to build relationships with the community, trying to take care of people, interested in doing more demonstrations, trying to be more effective in doing those demonstrations. And they were also dealing with a lot of their own personal issues, battling addiction, dealing with mental health issues. And so for a lot of reasons, just in very vulnerable points, when Azir came in and preyed upon that and took their wanting to try and do more, to be more effective in challenging the evil forces of capitalism, and he exploited that and tried to manipulate them in different ways, as they were talking about wanting to have more effective demonstrations, to have better gear for going out to demonstrations and things like that. He's the one who started introducing ideas of explosives.
And so he was also at this point, like, providing them with employment opportunities, as well as drugs and alcohol, money, support, almost like a father figure type thing.
Very much so. He was, promising them places to live and things like that. Something that I don't know how much has been publicized about the case is that a lot of the conversations that he was having with them were as he was driving them to work. He was in the business of flipping houses, and so he was having them work on his houses. And so a lot of these conversations were as he's driving them to job sites and then at job sites. So it wasn't just that they were talking to someone who was someone else who they thought was from the community or something. He was very much taking on that role of father figure, and they saw him as his boss, that they were having these conversations with. So he was, there were all kinds of power dynamics that he was exploiting through these relationships.
So throughout the case, so the steps in the actual case, they were picked up on the 30th of April in 2012 for having attempted to place these fake explosives that were purchased through Shaquille Azir from FBI agents who were undercover at the base of this bridge outside of Cleveland to make a big impact on capitalism on May 1st, right? Yeah. And then they went back to a restaurant, and one of them attempted to explode the bridge, and it didn't. And then they were picked up there. Can you talk a little bit about what their case looked like from that point on?
Yeah, from that point, I mean, they were very much dealing with being prosecuted as terrorists. We've seen like the large trend of that since 9/11, where the government has been going after these terrorism prosecutions and, wanting to create this idea that the government is keeping us safe from terrorists. But these are not the only people who have been entrapped through government-created plots. So the government creates this idea of terrorism that was going to happen, and then the government swooping in as the heroes and putting an end to it. And so we need to look at the framework in that broader scope and looking at how the government is manufacturing terrorism so that then they can show that they are putting an end to it. And it's ridiculous and needs to be questioned. And these people, the Cleveland Four, in their cases, got to unfortunately experience that at that very personal level, going through, as soon as they were arrested, being put in solitary confinement, not having a lot of access to court resources, not having a lot of legal support, struggling to have community support.
They had the whole world against them is what it felt like. And the government,
Yes.
You make the good point of saying that the government, set up in this case and has in a number of other circumstances, including and mostly against Muslim Americans, has set up these cases where somebody was angry about something, and so this informant steps in and is like, oh, well, yeah, I'm angry about that too. You're not angry enough, though. Let's go do some stuff. And oh, here, I can get you this stuff. And it just kind of plants the seeds, provides the supposed opportunities, which are oftentimes through their FBI handlers and faked to make sure that the circumstance goes out safely. But where, as I understand, the Four, when they talked about upping the ante and taking radical action from that next step, wasn't necessarily anything that was going to threaten human safety. It was symbolic actions like damaging signs outside of banks, blowing up bank signs maybe. When Shaquille Azir introduces the idea of no, that's not enough. We need to up the ante and we need to get big explosives and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can look at throughout his time with them, they were talking about wanting things like gear to wear to protest because cops are using violent tactics, and they were wanting things like paint bombs or maybe pepper spray, things like that are definitely a different realm of things than talking about explosives. And they repeatedly also expressed that they didn't want to hurt anyone, even when, talk started to form about the bridge. Multiple times they were trying to back out of it. They were asking questions about, when would people not be on the bridge? So always expressing that interest in not hurting people, but just wanting to find ways to impact capitalism.
And this is within the framework for people who are listening. Like you said, it's the end of Occupy, which is this very vaguely populist time. A lot of people got radicalized through this period, and these are young, passionate people who very much want to help people through their activism and through their charity work. And this is Cleveland, which is kind of a dire, deindustrialized Midwestern city in the Rust Belt, just having gone through year 4 of its most recent and the national economic depression that was going on. Just painting that picture, or in my head when I put those elements in there, it just creates this dire situation. And no wonder these kids these young men were angry and were incited and wanted to do something, and it just took this person working on behalf of the federal government to have them say some stupid stuff and plan to do something that was really stupid, especially through peer pressure.
Yeah, and even Brandon, I know in particular with some of what you just talked about, his dad's house was in the process of being foreclosed on as this was going on, and Azir was offering to help his dad get out of that situation. So even at that very core personal level, he was manipulating them based on their family circumstances at this rough financial time.
That's crazy. So initially there were 5 people. So Anthony Haney took a cooperating plea. Can you talk a little bit about how the court case went through and for the 4 of them?
So Brandon, Connor, and Doug, they took non-cooperating plea deals, but a lot of times when we look at plea deals, it's people working with the prosecutor ahead of time to work out exactly what the sentence is going to be, and knowing that going into signing the plea deal and agreeing to it. But with theirs, it was just that they were pleading guilty and then going before the judge and seeing what the sentence would be. So they were walking into that in a very scary situation, knowing that, it could have been life basically for what they were accused of doing. But they got sentences all around a decade, give or take a year or so. And then supervised release for the rest of their lives. So that means probation forever for them. And that's because of the terrorism enhancement that was placed on these cases. With the terrorism enhancement, judges have the discretion to make supervised release anywhere from 0 to life, and the judge gave them life. So clearly on the extreme high end of that. So people who, being arrested when they're around 20 years old and then going to prison for a decade and then looking at being on probation for the rest of their life. And then Josh, he decided to take his case to trial, which, as we could probably expect, didn't go well. It never goes well when people are accused of terrorism. The public has very strong ideas around that word. And so trial did not go well for him, and he ended up with similar sentences to the rest of them.
Did he get the terrorist enhancement also?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why they all have the supervised release for the rest of their lives.
So fast forward, I guess, can you talk a little bit about the circumstances of their incarceration? Like how are they getting on, and what sort of facilities are they in, and how long do they have left of their sentences?
Yeah, so they all have at least a few years left in prison, and they've all had a rough time. They've done long stretches in the SHU. Right now, currently, Connor and Josh are both in the SHU. Brandon also was just recently, but then he was let out. So definitely a rough time for all of them, and a big part of why they need that continued support from people. They've, all been in prison now for over 4 years. And a lot of times in cases like this, there's a lot of support in the beginning when, there's a lot of fresh media attention, and people feel a lot of support in the first year or so. But now it's been longer, and there needs to be that continued support for them, especially as they do continue to feel very isolated when they are put in the SHU and when they're in some very rough facilities, and when they are looking towards a pretty daunting rest of their sentence.
For listeners that may not be aware, can you describe what the SHU is, what security housing is, what it looks like?
Yeah, so that's when people are taken out of general population. They are kept in a cell for usually 23 hours a day, and they don't have as much access to commissary and other things, and they're just very isolated. And there's been study after study showing that when people are placed in the SHU, especially for more than a week or two, that it very much impacts their mental functioning, contributes to depression, contributes to suicidal thoughts, contributes to a lot of anxiety, and can have a permanent impact on people's brains that can take a very long time to recover from. And we've seen even politicians have spoken out against solitary confinement in this form. And it's something that, there needs to be that continued push to not, for no one to ever be in that circumstance, let alone ever be in prison. And so it's been very rough on them, especially since they were experiencing a lot of mental health issues, even going into prison. And then the SHU can very much exacerbate things like that.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with Brandon, and if you have much of one with the other folks? What kind of personalities are they? I know that Connor is a pretty prolific writer and has turned to Islam in the last few years and has a pretty esoteric mind, it seems like. But what are their personalities like?
Yeah, so I mostly know Brandon. I've been doing legal work for him for the last several months and gotten to know him on a personal level too through doing that. And he is a very intelligent, compassionate person who's been using his time in prison to figure out what he can do to help people more when he gets out. Even while in prison, he's been doing things like tutoring people, helping people with legal issues. He's learning Spanish. He wants to be able to start a nonprofit organization when he gets out to help low-income people. So just he has had a very rough time and has, had some very dark moments in that. But he is trying to hold on to that goodness and that hope, and wanting to be able to continue to just help people, and has such a big heart through all of this. The other three, I don't know on a personal level. I've mostly just gotten to know a bit about them through learning more about the case. And I am just repeatedly struck by how this is a group of people who are just, trying to search for ways to want to make good change in the world. And now these are the situations they're in. And the whole case is just heartbreaking. The more I learn about it, the more heartbreaking it feels.
As you mentioned before, with a lot of cases, people get support immediately, and then that kind of wanes as time goes on. It's hard for individuals, non-professional individuals, to sustain community interest and go out all the time and bring up the names and try to keep their faces relevant and keep in contact and do these things. It's difficult when we have jobs and we have lives on the outside too. But can you talk about how why the case has waned support? Is it because of the nature of the charges? You mentioned difficulty in community outreach, or because of the target of the attempted action, or just that waning?
Yeah, I think part of it is just the time. People unfortunately have short attention spans on things, and as we see new people become prisoners, people tend to shift their focus to the new stuff. And it's unfortunate how that happens, because these people clearly are still sitting in prison and they deserve to not feel forgotten. So that is just kind of a general for anyone who's in prison, especially when we're looking at for people who have, decades in prison, that we remember to keep them in the prisoner support work that we do. If you're writing a letter to a newer prisoner, take a minute to write a letter to someone who's been in prison for a decade as well. And just make sure that that's always part of the work we're doing. It can be tricky to talk to people at a case like this, where we're talking about, they were accused of preparing to blow up a bridge. And as much as we can say that, this happened, and it did happen because of an informant's influence and plotting, they ultimately were there. And so it's hard to talk to people sometimes about that and why they should support an action like that some people would put in the category of violence. Some people may even think of that as terrorism. But then I think we need to pull back to the bigger political framework and look at, we need to constantly question that word terrorism. Look at how the government uses it. The government will place that word on any group of people that they want there to be fear surrounding. And so we need to question that word. And every time we see the government trying to use it to its own advantage, to show that we're not going to let that happen, that if they're going to use that against people, especially people who are part of our communities, that we're going to push back on that we're going to show these people support. And to just continue to think about what is the broader political framework in which we're doing our organizing work, and to recognize that if we are challenging the status quo, challenging the government and corporations that are profiting off of that there's going to be pushback. And it may be in forms like this, and it may be in other forms. But whoever the people are who become at the center of that, where the pushback is focused, they need to never feel alone. So even if people maybe have difficulty thinking about what the Cleveland Four were accused of, it's not just about them. It's not just about that bridge, but it's about this bigger political context and us needing to show that we are going to take care of each other, and we are not going to let the government be the one in control of the narrative about where our support goes or what terrorism is even.
I think it's really important. We've already sort of framed this in terms of this stuff was going on during Occupy, but all this was I think all of this was timed by the government to undermine the Occupy the Occupy movement nationally as an anti-capitalist, or at least like movement challenging capitalism, when anarchism was a philosophy that was coming back into the popular mindset, to occur on May Day during the NATO protests, like nearby in Chicago, and to just sort of like increase the national policing mandate in the domestic war on terror. So, I mean, the timing was perfect to have this wider swath, and these individuals like were and are a part of this wider anti-capitalist, anti-authoritarian movement. And I think it's really important for us to, like you say, make them know that they're not forgotten, reframe the narratives around use of force. And also, I think it's a continued challenge that's always going to be there when we're going to have the state trying to undermine our organizing and undermine our communities, to be out there making sure that there are no more Cleveland 4s.
Yeah. I mean, we have to remember, too, that, the age-old tactic that the government uses is to divide movements, to pick out people to paint as extremists and make everyone else want to distance themselves from them, because then you have this like quote like mainstream like acceptable movement that the government is fine with because it's not challenging anything real, and then the people who are labeled as the extremists get cast aside, they get forgotten. And we need to work to not let those divisions happen, to recognize that there needs to be diversity of tactics, there need to be different perspectives, there need to be those internal discussions about how to move forward and to most effectively challenge the powers that be. And that we just need to have we all need to have a stronger understanding of how the government uses those tactics against us and to divide us, and to organize in ways in which we can counter that.
So, Amanda, you mentioned letter writing as a way of supporting the 4. Can you talk about what other, like, what would you tell to anyone who's listening to this and who's like on the fence about like, well, what can I do to support like either any of these 4 men, Brandon, Skelly, Connor, or Doug? What are some steps people can take?
Yeah, so definitely do write letters. That makes such a difference, just hearing from people on the outside, to have that connection, for them to hear stories about things. It means so much to them. And you can go on their website. There's the Cleveland4solidarity.org, and that's the number 4. And on there it has the addresses for the facilities that they're each at. And if you've never written a letter to a prisoner before, like, don't be afraid of it. It can be a little awkward at first to be writing to someone you don't know, but just introduce yourself and go from there. And it can be great relationships to build. And also donations are really important because it's unfortunately expensive for people to be in prison. If they want to email their friends or family, or call their friends and family, or if they want stamps for their letters, all of that costs money. So donating towards their commissary fund is super important. There's been someone supporting them the whole time through all this, who does a lot of work to make sure that each of them get $50 a month on their commissary. But it's a lot of work for a lot of years to be able to raise that $200 a month. So whatever people can donate towards their commissary is amazing. And you can do that through the website or the Facebook page, which is Cleveland 4 Solidarity. Both have donate buttons that will lead you to being able to do a donation. You can also do things like planning letter writing events. If you're tabling, you can have flyers about them or a jar to collect donations for them. Spread information online. Talk to your friends about their cases. And doing just a lot of work to not only spread awareness about them, but about the bigger political context of their case and why it's so important to support them as well as other prisoners.
I know that folks are doing this with Jerry Coach's period of time when he was resisting the grand jury up in New York, but they were like having a book club basically on the outside, where a group of friends would get together and they would buy a book and purchase a copy for Jerry off of his like support website. And that would allow for like a point of dialogue. They could be like, okay, well, I'm reading this, you're reading this. Let's set up a schedule and let's like write letters back and forth about where we're at with the book, what our thoughts are. And one thing that's really cool about the Cleveland4solidarity.org website is that There are Amazon wish lists. There are book lists for PM Press and for other publishers that the four are individually requesting copies of certain books. So you could, order one for them and then start engaging in a letter writing back and forth about whatever the topic is. And these are smart guys, so it's bound to be like good conversation.
Yeah, it's a good idea. And also to point out, Connor's birthday is coming up on the 17th. So a birthday card can be a great initial way to get in touch with someone. And I'm sure that it would mean a lot to him to hear from people on his birthday.
Well, any parting thoughts, Amanda?
I'd tell people to look more into the circumstances of this case as well as other prisoners. There are so many people out there who need support. And again, the website is clevelandforsolidarity.org. And the guys would all love to hear from people, and they appreciate support so much.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you.
We're speaking with Wendy Marlowe and Pat Boyle, members of the Unicorn Riot Media Collective, who are just back from Standing Rock in North Dakota. Unicorn Riot has been a significant media outlet on the front lines coverage of resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota since well before mainstream media stopped ignoring the struggle quite so much. Thanks a lot for taking the time to chat, both y'all.
Thanks for having us on, Burst.
Definitely.
Yeah, thanks, Burst.
Could you describe Unicorn Riot as a project for listeners that may not be aware of it?
Unicorn Riot is a 501c3 educational media platform. That's our platform. And then all of our content is licensed Creative Commons, non-commercial, share alike, which means that it is free to the public, of no charge, and free to any other non-commercial entities. Also, we don't take any ad money on our website, which is unicornriot.ninja. So if you go there, you'll notice that all our content is commercial free.
Why did you make that choice, if you could just spell it out?
We chose that because we kind of felt that the problem with media is that, ultimately people are going to be beholden to some sort of corporation or just ad driven based stuff. So when you're making media and ultimately you're making money from ads, a lot of the stories you're doing are going to be driven by, is this going to be good for the people giving us money to put ads on our website instead of actually getting the story out there. So we felt that it was the most ethical way for us to do this.
Considering the amount that y'all cover on the ground, how do you cover the costs of maintaining equipment and getting folks, from place to place and feeding them and stuff like that? You said it's a nonprofit. Does anyone get paid?
Yeah, everything is done through donations. We have some people will suddenly make a large donation. Other people are set up to just monthly donate $2 a month to Unicorn Riot. And so we have that set up as a recurring monthly payment. Everyone's working as a volunteer. All of the members originally were using their own equipment. Slowly, as donations have come in, we've been able to just slowly branch out in terms of purchasing really essential equipment and, such as a phone that has streaming capability that different members can borrow and sort of check out as they need. Different, we just got a mobile booster signal for Standing Rock specifically so that people would be able to link up to the internet more easily. And we have been able, as time has gone on, to pay out for travel expenses. So gas, plane tickets, rental cars, and food expenses while people are on the road and traveling to different locations to cover. So yes, everyone is working as a volunteer. However, equipment and travel is funded, and our hosting, live stream, things like that are funded by donations.
That is so awesome, considering the high level of quality that y'all put out. I've seen tons of shoestring budget projects where people just it pretty crappy, but yeah.
Yeah, we did actually just recently get a grant also.
Oh, that's awesome, too. Can you talk about the different mediums that are used on the website? Because it's not just, people may have seen some of the videos going around, and that content is just blam in your face, really immediate, amazing coverage. But can you talk about some of the other stuff that you host?
You mean the platforms we use?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so I'll talk about that one, I guess. We originally started off with a website using WordPress, Twitter, and Vimeo. And for a really long time, we didn't want to use Facebook. And it was quite a point of contention because a lot of people in the collective felt that Facebook was unethical as far as what they do to their users and how they contribute to the surveillance state. But ultimately, we ended up having to go with Facebook because it's basically the largest platform where a lot of people are. And we felt that, as someone who's providing this like news coverage, that we needed to be there. So we eventually expanded into Facebook reluctantly. And I think we've also been using YouTube a little bit, but we normally use Vimeo for a lot of our projects because we can actually release our videos with our license. So we're able to actually license our videos, non-commercial, share alike, Creative Commons on Vimeo. So those are. Oh, we also use Livestream. We lease a service from Livestream, which also members haven't always been super enthusiastic about, but there really isn't another live streaming platform right now for us that will give us the things that we sort of need. So we do lease a service from livestream.com as well.
And on the website, you're hosting the D program, right? And like live streaming of events and podcasts, as well as hosting like standalone videos. Yeah.
Yes.
So y'all have been providing some amazing on-the-ground coverage of numerous struggles around North America since your founding in 2014. In particular, I'm thinking of your coverage of the uprisings in Minneapolis and St. Paul area following the killings of Jamar Clark and Philando Castille in late 2015, mid-2016, respectively, and the ongoing struggle against the DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline. What are some points of conflict that y'all, as a project, have been present for that stand out for you? Maybe I just pointed to two of them.
I think take that one.
Yeah, in Denver, one of the first videos that Pat made was on April 28th, which was a Solidarity with Baltimore action that took place here, where there was just very intense police repression and basically just attacking this march almost instantly. It was odd to see. There had been a few marches in the few days before, but this one was basically put out as more of an anarchist militant focus in terms of defend Denver, and instantly the police were just attacking the crowd, and it just became, within minutes there were 10 arrests and pepper spraying the crowd and pepper spraying children, and that video went pretty far right away. We were surprised, it's just this kind of shock. So that was just kind of like the start in terms of like Denver's involvement with Unicorn Riot in terms of something really getting out there as a conflict. And then after that, we had started to cover some of the Denver Homeless Out Loud with the tiny homes. There was an action that day to build tiny homes in a park, and there were a lot of arrests that day. And then we also ended up, we heard there was going to be police presence at a small camp of tents that had gone up on the causeway in between the street and the sidewalk. I don't know if causeway is the right word, but the little strip there with grass. And so folks were putting up tents to sleep for the night because there was going to be a pretty bad snowstorm. And Pat and I decided to just stay overnight in his truck because we had heard the police were coming. And at 6 a.m. they came and started making announcements. And it's 6 a.m. in the middle of a blizzard. They kicked everyone out of these tents, and it was just really heartbreaking. And we were glad we were there and had made that decision to be there to capture that in the morning and just really be able to highlight for people what is going on in Denver in terms of the homeless sweeps, which consequently we're going to put out a post today. This is starting again. There's been just some massive sweeps starting in Denver where the police are taking homeless people's tents and sleeping bags as evidence and then citing them with the camping ban and giving them tickets for basically just trying to survive in 20-degree weather.
What kind of outcomes have you seen to the coverage that y'all are giving? Like, it's useful to be there as witness and also like having done cop watch myself, like I understand like just having a camera on cops will sometimes make them act differently if you're visible. But have you seen that sort of pan out, and or have you seen like city council change its methodology because of the impact of the videos getting spread around?
I would say
Pretty
probably no. But Pat, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's always going to depend on where you are and what city it is. Who's in power in that city, as far as like which political party, and just like the history of each place. So that's going to like vary from place to place. My experience is that the cops pretty much act the same. I think video, as far as whether it's someone who just wants to expose police corruption or someone who wants to hold them accountable, I'm not convinced that videotaping is always going to change their behavior, but it definitely does sometimes. But there was a protest against the chief of police conference here in Denver. I think that was like over a year ago now. And I went out to go cover that, and basically got assaulted by police. They arrested me for, I was videotaping. That's all I was doing. But they came at me because I was, in the street. So they tackled me and slammed me into a police car, separated my ribs, and then confiscated my camera for 8 months. And I fought it in court for a while, and then eventually we got him to just basically, I took a plea that I would plead guilty to obstruction if I got no other punishment. So eventually I took that. But that was pretty difficult, and I was videotaping it. They gave me back my footage. They said they would give me all of my footage. And of course the footage that I was taking while pretty much the hugest riot cop that works with DPD was the one that attacked me, and that footage is gone now. So they deleted my footage. So yeah, so I don't know. I mean, maybe they care, maybe they're just going to beat you in the street while you videotape it. It's really hard to say.
Yeah, that's for real. I was thinking when I asked that of there was one time, just anecdotally, that our cop watch crew rolled up on actually two things I can think of. One was a DUI stop in a neighborhood in Northern California. And so like two cars of us rolled up, and we just have our cameras, and we're like across the street, and we get no closer than like 15 feet away just for safety, so we don't get shoved or arrested or whatever by the cops. And they just kept like moving their interaction with the driver who they had pulled out of the car to behind their vehicle, to behind the other vehicle, and just trying to get out of visibility from us because they didn't want to be videotaped. And eventually they just like let this person who was obviously under the influence, like somebody else came by, dropped off a person to drive their vehicle, and they drove that person home rather than charging them, which in a lot of cases I think they would have. If not, like, why not? They get a huge amount of money out of it. Maybe they didn't want to do the paperwork or whatever, but cited the person basically and released them. I also got a really cool cop hat out of one interaction because they just like wanted to get out of the like. I showed up with the camera, and it was on them, and they pulled over some semi truck, and they just like sort of like looked at me and looked a little frightened, and then like were like, okay, well, yeah, just head on your way, and like got back in the car and drove off, and they left this cool like baseball cap, which I keep as a souvenir. But
that's great.
I don't know. Those are like small examples.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say, like, if I pull out a camera, like, are they going to address me as sir all of a sudden, or are they going to, like, beat me in the face?
Until
like,
they can take your camera.
I don't know anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, too, in terms of, definitely in terms of the homeless sweeps in Denver, I don't see any direct results right now. I think what we do as Unicorn Riot is about just, like, these stories that are going under the radar, that the mainstream media has such an angle that they come from one way or the other, with all the sensationalism, or just very much on the part of the city and where the money's involved, which is what it's all about anyways, clearing out people where there's no services for them, but they need to be cleared out of town because of the businesses don't want them around, and nobody really has a solution. There just aren't enough beds. There aren't enough shelters in Denver. And I think to me, what keeps me going is just that constant education piece, that constant view of like, all right, this is what's happening. This is what's continuing to happen. And I think we can't always see the buildup of public awareness or the buildup of outrage, because a lot of times, like right now, no one knows what to do, but people know that it's wrong. And we know that from the number of hits that a story like that gets shows us that people know that this is wrong. They want to see it and don't know what to do next. And I think as culture, as people, that builds. So it's hard to say where we are along that scale, but I'm willing to just keep telling that story until something can actually be tangibly done about it. It's just hard to measure like what kind of compassion can come in when people hear the real stories of what kind of police repression people of color are facing, to see these homeless people have their sleeping bags taken away. It's just, I think the more people see that, I believe the more compassion people can have for the whole story instead of just having this imagery that they're hit with constantly.
So I guess, would you call y'all's project an activist journalist project, or do you separate those two things?
Okay, this is a great question because it has come up repeatedly, especially in the last few months. And we all of us bristle at being referred to as an activist collective, because if we were an activist collective, we would be actively engaging in the struggles. Some of the terms that have come up that have been a little harder to argue with are advocacy journalism or impact journalism, because there's an obvious angle of what stories we're looking to tell. And there's an obvious sidestepping of the bullshit of like, I don't need to hear the other side of what the police in Standing Rock are doing, because they're liars and they're full of shit. So it's like, yeah, I'll watch their press conference, but I'm not going to just give them this respectful interview because they're lying and it's obvious, and I'm not going to pretend. And that objectiveness, I think, is often a lot of pretending. However, we are, 1,000% committed to telling the truth, to not skewing facts, to not misrepresenting anything. It's just a question of what voice deserves to be on our platform. And that is obviously this angle of struggle. And it would be silly to pretend it isn't. But to be called activist has been frustrating, because I know what that is, to be an activist and to organize and to be in the street and to be actively engaged in something, versus observing, documenting, telling the story, doing the research is a very different thing. So I think it's been a little confusing, or purposely confusing. These same news organizations that call us an activist collective also then try to steal our footage because they're not there.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Yeah, I mean, we don't...
What?
I didn't mean to call you an activist. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, Bruce. You're fine. Because, I mean, it is confusing, because we're clearly not just some, just some news organization that's just, reporting on the facts. It's like, obviously, we care. We have intense, there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of passion around it as well.
Yeah, I mean, we don't claim to be objective. I think a lot of us would reject the idea that any journalist could be objective, and that the journalists who claim that they are lying, or just don't really understand that that's like not really possible. So,
like you say, you put the stuff out there, you get the direct coverage, you get the people's voices that are out there, and you witness directly to the brutality of the struggle and what people are doing. And then you get the mainstream media that's poo-pooing the work that you do as unprofessional or whatever, or activisty, or, and then they're like, oh, well, but you're influencing the media landscape in this way because you're doing such an awesome job. Like the DAPL resistance, it's been escalating over a bunch of months. And, so just to go into like, block the laying of infrastructure for a pipeline that would carry oil from the Bakken field, crisscrossing the Missouri River and across unceded native tribal and ceremonial land of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, among other people. And you were one of the first media outlets that were out there covering these people directly in struggle. And have you seen that like influence of y'all's styles shaping what media coverage does come out of it now?
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
that's probably okay. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So when we were there, we ran into quite a few journalists who had nothing but positive things to say to us about the work that we were doing. And a lot of them were like more mainstream journalists or just like just better funded independent journalists. And they were definitely in that. And I mean, a lot of journalism now is, people sitting at home, scouring the internet. Maybe they'll try and get a document or two or a phone call from an official, and then they write a story. And that's a lot of what's been going on. Like CNN has been notorious for that. They buy somebody's footage. They didn't come out there. They just asked the cop a question and then, didn't interview any of the water protectors and, this is supposed to be journalism. And some people are going to believe that kind of stuff. But, I think that is part of our hope is that, this project will also push journalists to be better at their jobs. So the night of the bridge, we were there, and the lies that basically came out of Morton County Sheriff's was that, water protectors had lit fires and had done all this stuff. And, if they had, we would have reported on that, and that's okay if that's what they chose to do, but that wasn't what they chose to do. That wasn't what happened. Morton County Sheriff just made stuff up. They also tried to say the woman who had her arm blown off must have done it herself because they said that supposedly some sort of explosive devices or petrol bombs were being thrown, which didn't happen. And then when she went to surgery, one of the 20 plus surgeries she's now going to have just to keep this arm, the surgeon said that the shrapnel removed from her arm was consistent with crowd control devices. So like there's already like this way of kind of covering like what's actually going on, and breaking that as quickly as we can so that this whole, like all this room for like the spin machine and the lies, it becomes narrowed, I guess.
Yeah, I would say I don't actually know. Sometimes I can tell what influences what. Sometimes I can't. Sometimes I just stay so focused on just doing the next right thing and just doing what feels right to do that I don't necessarily always catch on like what the bigger scope is in terms of is it influencing or not. I do want to say just for clarification, I know you had said we just got back. Pat and I went for a week. We hadn't been there yet, so we wanted to just go. We managed to roll in literally right as events were starting to unfold on the bridge. We'd been to camp for about 5 minutes and then gone back into town. And when we came back, all of that started to happen. So we really just got dropped in to the fire with that. And there have been other folks on the ground living in the camp for months. And I just want to make sure I give them props because really that was what kind of got this whole thing started was just different people from our organization that were just there from the start and have been there for months and really just, understanding the whole situation as best they can and just being there and being available as soon as anything is happening. So
yeah, Lorenzo Cerna and Chris Thomas have been driving the body of our Standing Rock coverage, and we've just done a lot of support around it up until we were able to actually go.
If anyone out there listening goes and visits unicornriot.ninja, you'll just see like the amazing amount of coverage that's been building up over the months that Lorenzo and Chris have been putting together. It's astounding.
Well, and I guess I should also mention too that another member, Jen Siege, has been out there doing a lot of work, and Niko's also been there doing a lot of work. So I mean, everyone's been coming out there and doing
and Andrew
working hard
too, yeah.
when they're out there. Yep, and Andrew, yeah.
So you mentioned before getting arrested, while covering these events, members of your crew have been attacked and arrested. As a radical news source, how do you balance a desire to operate safely in the field with demands for getting the voices of the struggle out to the world? And do you find yourself ever leaning on like First Amendment arguments for freedom of the press to legitimate access or legitimate access to like the state around treaty protected indigenous lands and your welcomeness on those lands?
I think for the first part, I was thinking about that question because I think, I mean, there's never any pressure or any sort of, I don't know what, like obligation to be anywhere or any, do anything that anyone doesn't feel, 100% comfortable with in terms of being safe. I tend to just go towards, when things are happening and just use my best judgment or my best intuition of where to move in and out of. I wasn't doing any direct filming on the bridge that night. However, at one point I was like right up in the front with the water being sprayed. I was checking on each person who was filming, walked right across the line in between the riot cops and all of the water protectors with their shields to get over to the other side. It's just like, I'm just kind of gauging it minute to minute. At the same time, there was tear gas, there were flashbangs, there were concussion grenades. Within all of that, I had some goggles on and a really, just basic dust mask, which worked minimally. One of the things that came out of that night was we have donations coming in. We decided to use that donation money to order helmets and respirators, and as well as some body armor for anyone who wanted it within the collective. And I was like, sure, I will take that for next time. Just with the reality of Pat being shot with a rubber bullet and his badge being blasted off, and the reality of the injuries that we found out about throughout the night and the next day, I realized I probably did need a little bit of extra gear. But it is definitely just something, it's a personal choice for each person, how far they're willing to go. These are things we were all doing to begin with anyway. We're just kind of gearing up a little bit more now. And in terms of First Amendment is interesting because Pat was arrested for being in the street and was charged with obstruction of a street, I believe, and for filming a protest. And, in Denver recently at an anti-Trump rally, at the very end of a march, a large group of people went up and ended up on the highway blocking traffic, stopped traffic for about a half hour. And at some point I got up there and made the decision to go over the concrete barrier, knowing that, all right, I am now, I'm filming and I'm documenting. However, I am now going over this concrete barrier and I do put myself at risk. And there was just this Fox News reporter standing there. Suddenly he was just instantly there and reporting with a camera and a microphone and everything, just standing in front of the stopped cars. And I was just struck by that, all right, here's this Fox News reporter standing in the middle of the highway. Is he going to be arrested for obstructing the highway? I doubt that very highly. However, with Standing Rock, what we are seeing with Amy Goodman being arrested and what we've seen with our reporters being arrested is that the police definitely have a bias that way in terms of who they think is on their side or not, and the image of this, classic reporter. I think he was even wearing some sort of like trench coat or something with the camera and the microphone, and how that image carries a certain weight for law enforcement and for the public. And, we're just kind of walking on that line. And so I think in terms of Standing Rock, it feels like both to me. I feel very strongly that as someone who's documenting, I have a right to be there. And I also feel very strongly about the unceded treaty land. So I would say it's both for me.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because it's all over the place. Like, for example, I think one time, I don't remember if it was Justice for Jamar or Philando Castille, but Minneapolis Police Department actually flagged down Niko while they were live streaming to make a statement, which was weird.
Whoa.
And they were like, hey, it was like right on the highway while everything's going on. So that happened, but then, Morton County sheriffs will be like, oh, you guys aren't journalists, and have even made statements because we're not journalists because we don't portray law enforcement in a favorable light. So that's actually, those are arguments that they've actually like made. And so it's always hard to tell what's going on. At the same time, we're requesting documents and we have to pay for these documents. And they're never like, no, we're not going to give these to you. or whenever it's like this discussion we have with different government entities about obtaining these documents, they're never like, no, because you're not real journalists or whatever. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter because they're supposed to give them to anyone who will pay for them. So yeah, I mean, it's all over the place and it's hard to say. I don't necessarily feel, I used to do organizing work before I started doing this project, and I don't necessarily feel any more or less safe now that I'm doing this like journalist work. And at Standing Rock, people would tell us that they actually are going to target us first. So like water protectors, indigenous water protectors are like, yeah, they're going to go after you first. So it's been like that. As far as documenting on unceded tribal land, that's a great question. I hadn't really thought about it. When we went to Standing Rock, we have our own tent. We don't have like a wrangler or anything. We wear press badges. Some other media entities wouldn't necessarily be able to do that. So, I mean, we were welcomed into camp, treated really well by our neighbors. While I was there for a week, probably 40 or 50 people, both native and non-native, thanked me for the work that Unicorn Riot was doing. So as far as like when we're allowed to like document and where, that hasn't really come up yet. I hadn't really thought about it. If they told us, hey, we don't want you to film, like there's certain instances where they don't want us to document certain songs that are sacred or prayers or do things, and we respect that, and so we'll turn our cameras off, if people tell us that. So
I would imagine you'd be a little safer if, or think about or redact or whatever, if you hypothetically were catching something that could be incriminating to an individual.
Yeah. We can.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what the documentation that you're actually requesting from Morton County, any internal emails that contain the name of your project in it, to see if there's any like measurable bias in the attacks or arrests, and the patterns of how they deploy police? Is that what you're doing?
Well, so it's a bunch of different things. So like, for example, and I'm more of like the kind of camera live media person. I haven't really done a lot of the document requests, but we'll request things like, we want any emails from this date to this date that has the word protest, protester, and then they'll reply back being like, well, we have 4,000 emails that say that, and we'll be like, okay, well, can we narrow them down to like the no DAPA ones? And then they'll go, okay, sure. Well, and then usually what they say is, like, for example, I'm kind of thinking of our recent interaction with North Dakota's Department of Transportation. So we'll ask them for emails, because a lot of times the police departments won't give them to us, even though they're supposed to. So then, it'll be like, okay, we're going to narrow it down, but, we need first hours free, but we need like, anywhere from like $8 to $30 an hour to get you these emails. And a lot of times the prices seem really arbitrary and kind of just made up, and they vary from department to department. So yeah, so I mean, that's the kinds of stuff that goes on. A lot of times we'll end up paying for something and there's like nothing in there, and then we have to pay for them to redact stuff before they send it to us. It's weird. Yeah.
We've also used muckrock.com, and we've also done some specific fundraiser call outs. Some of the Muckrock requests are $5 each. So I've done some fundraiser requests where it's like, for $5 you can sponsor us trying to get these documents. I think that clicks with people or resonates with people sometimes, who can't be there in person but want to help, and it's like, all right, for $5 I can help get this record.
That's pretty awesome. I wasn't aware of this project before, but can you explain what Muckrock is?
Oh, I'm probably not the best person to explain that. Sorry.
That's okay.
I tend to operate sort of on sonar a lot, but Pat, maybe you can explain more what Muckrock is.
It's like a journalist, investigative journalist platform tool that a lot of people use, and so it's kind of like a third-party way to verify getting these documents, because you can just not use Muckrock and go around them. but then there's like, you kind of don't have a third party to verify if you got the documents or not. And so there's a lot of getting jerked around sometimes when you're like going to a government entity and being like, we want these documents, because, you know, they claim that they're operating in the interest of the people and that, you know, they're transparent. And so if that is true, which is like a pretty huge gray area altogether, then they should give people these documents. Yeah, Muckrock is like a third-party tool that you pay for, but then once those documents, once you get those documents, they're also available to other journalists. So if we're getting these documents, other journalists can look up our project, and you can actually look up Unicorn Riot on Muckrock, and you can see the requests that we've been doing. And so other journalists will also have access to that through Muckrock and or our website. And so that's like another aspect of the project, is like providing other journalists with this information as well.
That's awesome. I can't wait to spend some time looking through there. I mean, just like on the front page, scrolling down and seeing the projects within it, the private prison project, like over the like talking about FOIA requests around leveraging of the legal system. Down below that, subject matter, FBI files with a picture of Malcolm X on there. From Abby Hoffman to Malcolm X, Old Dirty Bastard to the ICP, FBI files read like a veritable who's who of the 20th century. I'm glad the ICP made it in that list.
There's great stuff on there, yeah. Yeah, and you know, and that's the thing, is like, this is kind of one of those, like, you know, rights we supposedly have that is underutilized. So, I mean, they are required to give us these things because, you know, they operate in our name, supposedly. And so if they're going to do that, then they need to hand over documents. And yeah, so, I mean, it's a good thing to do. Anyone can request documents from these government agencies. They'll probably try and make you pay for them. But yeah, I mean, it's a great way to go at it, and it's a good way to approach some of these issues.
Yeah, that's real cool. One of the questions that I had originally written that I sort of like skidded around or like asked a part of it with the journalism and activism one included a question of what do you feel is so essential about the direct coverage that your project provides, and how does it differ from, say, Vice and other non-hegemonic news sources? And I wonder if you wouldn't mind like responding to that and maybe unpacking. I mean, Vice has this style that seems kind of like edgy, and they get in weird places, but they're definitely not independent, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, and sometimes Vice does like really cool work, but I don't think that their analysis of social struggles or like militant social struggles is very good. I feel like it's kind of the hipsterification of news and social movements. And I think, like, you know, for example, they went out to go cover the women of the YPJ, and it just wasn't very good. It was just like this kind of whiny hipster complaining the whole time, I feel like this is fake. It was like a year or two before like things got really crazy, and just wasn't very deep. And they were kind of like questioning like if the Kurdish struggle was real. And like, I have a lot of qualms with it. I mean, they're also for profit. They do have corporations that they answer to. They do have corporate investors that they answer to. So, I mean, you know, they have ads all over their site. They have corporate overlords. We don't.
Yeah. I mean, they're directly connected to Fox.
Yeah.
Fox owns like 40% of Vice or whatever. That's gotta influence. I know like the profit motive influences. And so like if like Revolution sold, then they would try to sexy it up and sell Revolution. But
yeah. And they'll also, you know, I just think like misrepresented if that's also like in their interest. You know, I think that, you know, it's not just Vice. It's like most of the media right now is beholden to that. So when we started the project, we wanted to not have that. We didn't want to have corporate overlords. We didn't want to have bosses. We don't actually have bosses in our collective or hierarchies, at least not formal ones. We didn't want that. So it's a horizontal collective. We don't take corporate funding. We don't do ads. We release all our stuff to the public. And that certainly made it harder for us in a lot of cases to like get equipment or try and get funds to travel, or, you know, try and like just keep the people we have on the ground fed. But at the same time, it's also given us a lot of trust. Like, I think a lot of the reason why we've been welcomed into Standing Rock and haven't been like babysat or messed with by anybody in the camp is that there isn't a profit motive for us to be there. Like, we don't sell our footage, and we get hit up by corporate media constantly trying to buy our footage. CNN, MSNBC, all of them. And we're always like, no. And then sometimes they take it anyways. So,
and then what happens?
And then we have our lawyer send them a takedown notice. And if they still don't do it, then our lawyer sends them a bill for violating our copyright.
So at that point, in addition to the awesome footage getting out with your logo, you're also getting money from them and also getting to give them the bird too at the same time, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I mean, we usually tell them no, and we try to make it really clear that we don't want them to use their footage. And it's like, no, come do your job. Like, this is your job. Y'all have a lot of money, although there is actually kind of a media recession going on right now. I know in like the past 6 months, Vice had to lay off like 15 people. Like the Denver Post, I think, doesn't have an editorial board anymore. They all like edit each other's work now. So, I mean, there's also, it's like a really bad time for media and journalists. A lot of people want this like live breaking, and investigative journalism, but nobody really wants to like pay for it. And so, I don't know, our organization is kind of going to be okay in this climate because it's all volunteer right now, and we're resourceful. So, but yeah, I mean, not a lot of our funds have come from our lawyers sending a bill to corporate media. We try to like avoid that situation before it happens, but a little bit. We've gotten a little bit of funding from that happening.
So I'm sorry if this is like a weird conversation because it keeps jumping back and forth between the general like work that your collective does and then also like the DAPL struggle because you had been just up there and because members of your collective, as you say, have been like up there for such a long time, engaging with the folks there and witnessing and getting that stuff out. So sorry if that's kind of like a weird jumping back and forth thing. Hopefully editing will fix
That's all right.
that. Just kind of like off the deep end right here. My co-host was telling me last night about the drones that are up there that are blocking cell signal and other things. Is that a thing? Like law enforcement using drones to...
I would say, I was just reading something about that last night. I don't have enough research to completely know like what's, we've been trying to delve more into that and understand it. It all seems possible to me. I do know there were some signs around the camp just saying if you see a free Wi-Fi signal, do not jump on it. It's being used to fish, just like this is not secure and it's being directly used by law enforcement. Seems like anything's possible at this point. I mean, we would lose signal as soon as we got into camp. I don't know what it was like beforehand. So it's definitely hard to say. I think there might be other people that have more information about that.
So my experience with the drones is that the drones I saw, most of them were actually from the camp. Like people in the camp have drones. Like there's digital smoke signals and drone to be wild is out there. And other people I've never seen so many drones. So I'll tell you that there are drones flying around all the time. It's hard to tell if they're from the camp or law enforcement's. But most of the ones I see are usually from our side. There is an FCC no-fly zone they continue to impose, but some of the people in the camp are indigenous and saying, hey, this is unceded land, so like we're going to fly a drone here, and document this. So there's been that. There was a few days after the bridge standoff, a cell phone tower that was powered by solar panels did show up right outside the camp on, I think, like kind of more of the south end of the camp. We're not really sure who put that tower up, but all of a sudden after, Lorenzo had been out there since April, And then all of a sudden Lorenzo's on Verizon. All of a sudden Lorenzo had signal. So, and had like a few bars, like a few days later. Now, who did that? There's a lot of speculating, like, did the cops do it under the guise of safety? Did some of the cell providers or all of them decide they need to put a tower out there because there's about 3,000 people out there when we were in camp, but now there could be twice that. We're not really sure why that's going on, and there is a little bit of a faint signal if you go out there with a cell phone booster. They make them for like cars and trucks and like campers. You can actually get some okay signal, but the other thing too is that it depends on what provider you use. Like T-Mobile gets almost no signal out there. AT&T gets a little bit, and Verizon's like pretty good, but also the most expensive provider. So there's things like that. But I mean, it's remote out there, and a lot of people. There's also a lot of paranoia in the camp. So it's like, hard to really say like what's going on. I mean, we would get we went to Bismarck on Thanksgiving to cover that action. On our way back to camp, people are like, the cops are raiding the camp. Oh my God. We saw people on Twitter like, I'm tweeting my husband that I love them and stuff. We get to camp and everything's normal, So it was like, there's just a lot of paranoia. But now there is actually the coverage is still not very good, but it's better than it was because this cell phone tower, this solar powered cell phone tower appeared on the south end of camp.
Yeah, that's just bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the government does use fake cell phone. I mean, like, even just on Muckrock, here's the first story: Virginia State Police release cell phone surveillance logs because they set up a simulator like tower that's just collecting information on people. That's pinging people.
Yeah.
And
the other thing too is like if they were using an ISMI catcher, your cell phone still wouldn't work. It would look like it's working, but I don't think a lot of those devices actually pass signal through. So it seems like service is working. I mean, also like pretty much every internet service provider or mobile service provider does cooperate with the NSA. So people should try to use tools that's going to protect them from that anyway. So it's like all that stuff is being monitored anyways. And it'd probably be pretty easy for them to figure out like who's at the camp.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember, listeners, do not assume any sort of safety over digital means.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
But still, don't let that hamper, doing what you need to do. Just work around it.
Yeah, exactly.
Take your battery out, whatever. Well, so how can folks follow Unicorn Riot's coverage of all these real-time, real in-depth struggles that are going on? And also, do you need contributors, or is it like a collective thing that you have to be like vouched in and stuff like that?
We do have to vouch people in, and right now we're trying to figure out kind of like how we're going to grow and in what way. But we do have contributors. I think soon here we're going to actually have an online kind of submit form thing where people can submit videos and stuff to us, but we're still working on that. Twitter is always where you're going to see our stuff breaking. So if you go to UR_ninja on Twitter, you can see what we're talking about. You can see our articles. And whenever we're about to start live streaming, we tweet. You can look at our live stream channel, Unicorn Riot, on livestream.com. We're on Facebook, and you can check out our website at unicornriot.ninja.
That's awesome. Well, Wendy and Pat, thank you both for taking the time to talk to me, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. And y'all do great work.
Thanks, Burst. Thank you. You do too. I listen to your radio show like all the time.
Blushing again.
Oh, it's good to talk to you.
It's really good to talk to you too.
You're listening to WSFM LP 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.